A police officer walked the snowy streets of Seattle with Max, his loyal German shepherd, when fate placed a shivering little girl in his path. She whispered a warning that would shatter everything he thought he knew about loyalty and trust. Friends he once called family had betrayed him, and a hidden conspiracy threatened not only his career but his life. With a frightened child by his side, a faithful dog guarding every step, and an old friend returning to help, he began a journey through betrayal, courage, and hope. What happened next would test the power of truth, reveal the strength of love, and remind us that miracles often come when we least expect them. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels. And if you believe God still sends light into the darkest storms, hit that subscribe button, because this story may restore your faith in family, loyalty, and second chances. The city of Seattle lay beneath a heavy quilt of snow, its skyline muted by a curtain of drifting flakes. The waterfront shimmered with faint reflections from dockside lamps, blurred by frost, while the streets echoed with the crunch of tires on ice. It was the sort of night when breath froze in the air and the world seemed to hold its silence, broken only by the distant whistle of the wind. In such weather, people hurried home to warmth, but Daniel Carter was just stepping into the cold. Daniel Carter was 35 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with short brown hair flecked with early streaks of silver at the temples. His hazel eyes carried a depth that often gave him away before he spoke, a mix of fatigue, vigilance, and a kind of quiet sadness. Years of military service had left their mark on him. He walked with the upright bearing of a soldier, but with a heaviness in his movements, as though every step was measured. He had once been light-hearted, a man who laughed freely, but deployments overseas, the constant sight of men breaking down under pressure, and a close friend's death during a routine patrol had hardened his spirit. His reputation in the Seattle Police Department was one of reliability and grit. He was the officer who would not abandon a call even if it came at 2 a.m. And yet, beneath the uniform and the stern expression, there lived a man who quietly longed for simple companionship, something that did not involve regulations or danger. That longing had found its answer in Max. Max was a 6-year-old German shepherd with a muscular build, black and tan fur thickened by the cold, and piercing amber eyes that always seemed to study the world for threats. Once a canine service dog, Max had spent years training beside Daniel and other officers, sniffing out narcotics, tracking suspects, and even pulling injured civilians from wreckage. Retirement had not softened him. If anything, it had made him more vigilant, as though he knew his days of being needed were far from over. Max was protective, deeply loyal, and carried scars under his fur one across his left flank from a knife wound, another barely visible across his nose. These marks were badges of honor. To strangers, Max looked intimidating, but to Daniel, he was family. The bond between them had been forged not in comfort, but in fire. When Daniel spoke, Max seemed to understand beyond words, tilting his head or letting out a low bark in answer. On that winter night, Daniel left the precinct after a double shift, shoulders heavy beneath a thick police winter coat. The city was blanketed in silence as he made his way across the parking lot. Snow crunched under his boots. The boughs of nearby trees sagged with white weight. Max padded at his side, alert, his breath steaming in the air. Daniel unlocked his black SUV, brushing snow off the handle, and Max jumped into the back seat as naturally as though he owned the space. Daniel slid into the driver's seat, sighing deeply. The heater whirred, blowing lukewarm air that barely made a difference against the cold seeping through the glass. Just as Daniel reached to start the engine, Max's ears perked, his whole body stiffening. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Daniel paused, eyes narrowing in the rearview mirror. That was when he saw her. Crouched in the shadows of the back seat was a little girl, barely 6 years old, her body wrapped in a threadbare pink sweater far too thin for the weather. Her light brown hair was tangled and damp from melted snow, and her large brown eyes widened as Daniel turned toward her. Her face was pale, cheeks chapped red, lips trembling. She moved quickly, pressing a small hand against his mouth before he could speak. "Don't say anything," she whispered, her voice trembling but urgent. "They're watching you." Her name was Lily Harper. Though Daniel did not know it yet, she was a child used to hiding in shadows. Lily had grown up in hardship, her father gone long before she could remember. her mother working double shifts until sickness took her away last winter. Since then, Lily had drifted between relatives who treated her more as a burden than a child. She had learned to survive by listening, by observing, by staying quiet. That survival instinct shone in her wide, frightened eyes as she stared at Daniel. She was thin for her age, small wrists protruding from the sleeves of her sweater, and she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit whose fur was matted from years of clutching. Her voice was fragile but carried an intensity that Daniel could not ignore. Max stopped growling, tilting his head as if recognizing the child's fear. Slowly he inched closer from the back, his warm breath puffing against her arm. Lily flinched at first, then hesitantly brushed her fingers across his thick fur, drawing strength from the animal's solid presence. Daniel pulled her hand gently away from his mouth, his own voice kept low. "Who's watching me, kid?" But before she could answer, Max's growl returned, deeper this time, vibrating in the enclosed space of the car. Daniel followed his gaze out through the frosted window. Standing beneath a flickering street lamp at the edge of the snowy lot was a man in a long raincoat, unmoving. His face was obscured by the collar pulled high and the brim of a dark hat. The snow fell thick around him, but he stood as if rooted, eyes locked on Daniel's car. Daniel's pulse quickened. The night, already cold, seemed to sharpen into something more dangerous. He glanced back at Lily, whose small body shook as she whispered, "That's one of them." The heater hummed weakly. Snow continued to fall. Max barked once, sharp and commanding, his amber eyes fixed on the stranger outside. Daniel's hand went instinctively to the grip of his service weapon, though he did not draw it. The man under the lamp did not move closer. He simply stood, waiting, watching. And in that frozen moment, Daniel Carter realized that this was no ordinary night. The man in the raincoat remained frozen beneath the sputtering lamp, and the snow fell harder now, smudging his outline as though the storm itself wanted to swallow him. Daniel Carter sat rigid in the driver's seat, his pulse steady but strong, while Max's body quivered with restrained aggression. Beside them, Lily clutched her ragged rabbit so tightly her knuckles turned white. Daniel considered stepping out, confronting the figure, but instinct held him back. He had survived too many ambushes in uniform to ignore a child's warning. Instead, he started the engine, the SUV rumbling to life, and guided the vehicle out of the lot. Max turned in circles once before lying low, his eyes still fixed on the shrinking silhouette outside. The streets of Seattle were treacherous in winter, the snowplows struggling to keep up with the constant fall. Streetlights cast pale circles over icy asphalt, and storefronts stood shuttered against the storm. Lily sat quietly in the back, her breath fogging the window as she traced shapes into the frost. Daniel glanced at her in the mirror, noting her small frame shivering beneath the thin sweater. He shrugged out of his own scarf gray wool, frayed at the ends, and handed it to her. She hesitated, then wrapped it around her neck, the oversized fabric nearly swallowing her chin. For the first time, a hint of relief softened her frightened expression. "Talk to me," Daniel said, keeping his tone calm. "Who are they?" Lily's voice was soft, but each word carried the weight of something far beyond her years. "Two people. I heard them at the warehouse by the docks. They said your name. They said you won't be around after Thursday." She pressed her lips tight as though afraid to repeat the rest. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, the windshield wipers slashing rhythmically through the snow. Thursday was the day of a major departmental briefing, where internal audits were scheduled to be presented. It was the kind of meeting where reputations could be made or destroyed. He exhaled slowly, the thought of betrayal gnawing at him. "They said names?" he asked. Lily nodded, her breath catching. "A man called Bobby, and a woman, Evelyn." The names hit Daniel like ice water. Bobby Lang was more than a colleague. He was once Daniel's partner on patrol, a man he had trusted with his life. Bobby was in his late 30s, stocky, with a rough charm that made him well-liked among the ranks. He laughed easily, but Daniel had seen darker flashes in him, a temper, a hunger for shortcuts. Still, betrayal from Bobby seemed unthinkable. Evelyn Shaw, meanwhile, was the quiet efficiency behind half the precinct's operations. In her early 40s, with sharp cheekbones and neatly kept auburn hair, she handled paperwork and schedules with clockwork precision. Evelyn rarely spoke more than necessary, but she was known for her discretion. If her name was tied to this, then something deeper was at play. Daniel's jaw tightened. Those two have been close to me for years. He muttered the words more to himself than to Lily. The girl's wide eyes shone in the dim car light. I know what I heard. I only came because you once gave me food when no one else looked at me. You didn't turn away. The memory returned to him. A rainy night months earlier, when he spotted a girl huddled by a convenience store dumpster, soaked through, trying to peel a moldy crust of bread. He had bought her a sandwich and slipped a few dollars into her pocket. He had assumed she disappeared into the city like so many others. Yet here she was, repaying kindness with risk. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel, steering carefully along the icy waterfront. All right, Lily. I believe you, Max let out a low huff, as though confirming the decision. The snow thickened as they neared the old part of town, where cobblestone alleys twisted between brick warehouses. Daniel slowed in front of a small cafe tucked beneath a string of faded holiday lights. Its windows glowed warmly, fogged with condensation, a welcome refuge against the biting wind. He parked near the curb and they hurried inside. The cafe was a relic of another era, with dark wooden beams and a faint smell of cinnamon clinging to the air. A fireplace crackled in the corner, warming the handful of patrons nursing mugs of coffee. Max settled obediently at Daniel's feet, though his posture remained alert. Lily pressed close to Daniel, still clutching her stuffed rabbit as they took a seat by the window. It wasn't long before a tall woman in a heavy wool coat entered, brushing snow from her shoulders. Her dark hair was streaked with faint gray, tied back neatly, and her blue-gray eyes scanned the room with the sharpness of someone trained never to miss details. Caroline Fields moved with the quiet authority of a detective, though her posture carried a trace of weariness from years in the job. In her late 30s, she had once shared a classroom with Daniel, and though life had taken them in different directions, there was an unspoken familiarity in the way her gaze softened upon seeing him. Caroline was known for her relentless pursuit of the truth. A case years ago where she exposed a corrupt superior had made her both respected and feared. That same case had left her cautious, though she trusted very few, and every smile she offered seemed to carry a shadow of calculation. Daniel, she greeted, her voice calm, low, but not without warmth. Caroline, he replied, standing to shake her hand. Her eyes flicked to Lily, then to Max. This is new. Daniel explained quickly, sketching the outline of what Lily had told him. As he spoke the names Bobby Lang and Evelyn Shaw, Caroline's expression hardened. She pulled off her gloves slowly, each movement precise. I've heard whispers, she said finally, leaning closer so only he could hear. Bobby's been flashing money he shouldn't have. Evelyn's been making calls late at night, off the record. Nothing I could prove. But if this child overheard them planning something, you can't ignore it. Lily's gaze darted between the adults, uncertain if she should add more. Caroline crouched slightly so their eyes met. You're very brave, Lily. But from now on, you stick with us. Understand? The girl nodded timidly. Daniel leaned back, the weight of betrayal sinking in. He wanted to deny it, to believe Bobby and Evelyn incapable of such treachery. But Caroline's words, coupled with Lily's trembling testimony, painted a darker picture. Caroline straightened, drawing her coat tighter. Listen, you can't confront them yet. They'll deny everything, and worse, they'll know you're on to them. You need evidence, solid evidence that no one can dismiss. Daniel rubbed his forehead, the tension of the night pressing down. Where do I start? The warehouse, Caroline answered without hesitation. If that's where Lily heard them, that's where the trail begins. But you'll need to be careful. If someone was already watching you tonight, they know you're vulnerable. Outside, the storm rattled the window panes. Max raised his head suddenly, ears pricked, eyes locked on the street beyond the glass. Daniel followed his gaze and saw, through the haze of falling snow, the faint silhouette of a man lingering on the corner. The raincoat again. Always there. Always watching. The cafe's fire crackled, but the warmth did little to ease the chill running down Daniel's spine. The storm had thickened by the time Daniel Carter, Caroline Fields, Lily Harper, and Max reached the industrial waterfront. The docks were nearly abandoned in winter, their warehouses looming like great frozen beasts, their brick walls dusted with layers of snow and their windows fogged or broken. The harbor itself groaned under slabs of ice forming along its edges, the water dark and sluggish beneath. Seattle's winter had a way of turning the familiar into something uncanny, and tonight the city seemed to conspire against them with silence. save for the crunch of snow beneath their boots and Max's steady breathing. Daniel guided them carefully through the streets, headlights bouncing across shuttered storefronts. His SUV, though sturdy, fishtailed once on a slick patch of ice before he corrected it with practiced ease. Lily sat quietly in the back, pressed against the door as though trying to make herself invisible. Her small hands rubbed Max's thick coat for comfort, and the dog, sensing her unease, stayed close, pressing his warm body against her side. Caroline, seated in the passenger seat, scanned their surroundings constantly. Even off duty, she carried herself like a detective, shoulders squared, eyes sharp, every movement economical. She had removed her wool gloves to jot notes in a small leather-bound book she always carried. Daniel remembered that from their school days. Caroline had always been meticulous, the one who organized study groups and corrected mistakes without apology. That same precision had made her an effective investigator, but it had also cost her dearly. Years ago, exposing a corrupt superior had left her ostracized by some in the department, friends turning cold, allies disappearing. Betrayal was no stranger to her. Perhaps that was why she was here now, because she recognized the signs in Daniel's own case. They parked 2 blocks away from the warehouse Lily had described. The building loomed against the snowy night sky, a hulking silhouette with rusting metal siding and a loading dock buried beneath drifts of snow. A chain-link fence surrounded the lot, but part of it had collapsed under the weight of ice. They slipped through silently. The snow crunched under their boots, leaving fresh trails that seemed almost too loud in the quiet. Max sniffed the ground constantly, nose twitching, tail rigid. "Show us where you heard them," Daniel murmured to Lily. The girl pointed toward a side door, her breath puffing visibly in the frigid air. Daniel tried the handle. It was locked, but old and rusted. He braced his shoulder against it and forced it open with a metallic groan. Inside, the air was colder still, the vast warehouse echoing with every sound. Their breaths formed clouds in the dim light leaking through cracked windows. The interior was filled with abandoned crates, nets stiff with ice, and the faint smell of salt. Overhead, icicles hung from beams, dripping occasionally onto the concrete floor. Lily led them toward a corner where a stack of old barrels stood. "They were here," she whispered. "I hid behind those boxes." Caroline crouched, running a gloved hand over the floor. "Look," she said, pointing to faint scuff marks near the barrels. "Someone's been here recently." Max's low growl drew their attention to a nearby pile of crates. The dog moved quickly, sniffing and pawing until he uncovered a small leather folder wedged beneath a plank. Daniel picked it up, brushing frost from its surface. Inside were papers, contracts, typed memos, lists of shipments. His name appeared more than once, always in connection to phrases like replacement and transfer of authority. Daniel's stomach knotted. He held the folder out for Caroline, who scanned the pages under her flashlight. "This isn't just about you," she muttered. "These documents mention funds being rerouted. Off-the-books shipments. Somebody is laundering money through the department using the docks." Lily tugged at Daniel's coat, eyes wide. "That's what they talked about. They said you'd ask questions, so you had to disappear." Before Daniel could respond, Max's ears pricked. He let out a sharp bark, then bolted toward the far end of the warehouse, claws clicking against the ice. Daniel followed, gun drawn, Caroline right behind him. Lily clung to the stuffed rabbit and stayed close to the crates. At the far end, footprints were pressed deep into the snow that had blown in through a broken loading door. Fresh, large. Whoever had been here had left only moments earlier. Daniel's eyes narrowed. He scanned the shadows outside, his flashlight catching only whirling snow. Then, at the edge of the lot, he saw it. A dark silhouette, broad-shouldered, standing perfectly still under the storm. The man in the raincoat. Caroline raised her weapon instinctively, but the figure did not move closer. Instead, he turned slowly and disappeared into the swirling snow, leaving only the trail of prints behind. Daniel clenched his jaw. This was no coincidence. The stranger had been following them all night. But was he working with Bobby and Evelyn, or was his presence meant as a warning? They returned to Lily, who waited nervously by the barrels. Daniel crouched to meet her eyes. "You did good, Lily. Really good." The girl nodded but said nothing, her small shoulders trembling. Caroline tucked the folder into her coat. "We need to get this back and analyze it properly. It's not enough to nail Bobby and Evelyn yet, but it's a start." Max circled them once, ears still twitching, nose testing the cold air for lingering scent. He was restless, every muscle taut with readiness. Daniel laid a hand on the dog's back, grounding him, and glanced once more toward the broken door. The storm had already begun to bury the footprints. The warehouse creaked around them, its frozen beams groaning as though the building itself was weary of secrets. Daniel straightened, guiding Lily toward the exit. He had been a soldier long enough to know when battles were only beginning, and tonight, under Seattle's endless winter sky, this was just the start. The wind howled against the eaves of the small roadside inn where Daniel Carter decided to shelter Lily Harper for the night. It was nearly midnight, and the storm had only grown worse. The inn itself was old, its timber-framed walls bowing slightly under the weight of snow piled against them. Warm lamplight glowed behind the frosted windows, but Daniel's instincts told him that safety here was temporary, fragile. Max, the German shepherd, paced the room once they entered, his claws tapping softly against the wooden floorboards, sniffing every corner before settling uneasily by the door. Lily seemed relieved to be in warmth at last, though her face was pale with fatigue. She curled up on the bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, the toy's fabric thin, its stitching frayed from years of use. Daniel covered her with a spare wool blanket, noting again the frailty of her body. She reminded him of his niece back in Tacoma, a child who had once hidden from fireworks because the sound reminded her of thunder. Lily hid from more than storms, she hid from people. That thought burned in his chest. Caroline Fields remained standing, arms crossed, her sharp blue-gray eyes watching the snow whip across the window pane. Her detective instincts rarely let her rest. She looked like a woman who carried the weight of suspicion everywhere, even in moments of peace. Her hair, dark and streaked with silver, was still damp from melted snow. Years of hunting corruption had carved lines of weariness into her otherwise striking face, but the fire in her gaze remained. She was not someone who gave in easily to fear. Daniel lowered his voice so Lily couldn't hear. The folder from the warehouse, it points to more than betrayal. There's money moving through the department. This could be bigger than Bobby or Evelyn. Caroline nodded grimly. I've suspected something like this for months. I couldn't prove it alone. If Bobby and Evelyn are pawns in a larger scheme, then whoever's pulling the strings knows you're looking now. That man in the raincoat, he's either their enforcer or someone else watching the same trail. Before Daniel could answer, Max growled low, rising to his feet, his amber eyes fixed on the door. Daniel drew his weapon instinctively, but the sound faded, likely only the storm battering the walls. Still, the dog's unease lingered. When morning came, Lily was gone. Daniel bolted upright, heart pounding, scanning the small room. The blanket was crumpled on the bed, the stuffed rabbit missing. Caroline cursed under her breath, already pulling on her coat. Max sniffed furiously, circling, before locking onto a faint scent trail leading toward the inn's back exit. On the nightstand lay a folded note scrawled in a shaky hand. "Come to the warehouse if you want to see me." Daniel's blood ran cold. They took her. But Caroline, sharper, noticed the small doodle at the corner of the note, an uneven drawing of a dog with pointy ears. "No," she murmured. "She left this herself. She wanted you to know she's being forced, but also that she's alive." Max barked once, eager, insistent, as if to say there was no time to waste. The warehouse looked even bleaker in daylight, snow piled high against its rusted doors. Inside, shadows clung to every corner. Daniel moved first, gun ready, Max at his side, while Caroline covered their flank. Their breath fogged in the freezing air, and the silence pressed down like a weight. They found Lily near the center of the room, standing stiffly between two figures, Bobby Lang and Evelyn Shaw. Bobby looked much as Daniel remembered, though harder somehow, as though greed had chiseled away whatever decency once lived in him. His stocky build filled his thick leather jacket, his face rough, a scar slicing across one eyebrow from an old bar fight he had once laughed about. There was no laughter now. His eyes glittered with a mix of defiance and unease. Evelyn stood beside him, arms folded tightly. She was tall, her auburn hair pulled back in its usual neat style, but her face was pale, lips pressed thin. Known for her cool efficiency, she now radiated nervous energy, as though the perfect control she valued was cracking. Years of being overlooked in favor of louder, more charismatic men had made her bitter, hungry for recognition. Perhaps that hunger had led her here. "Put the gun down, Daniel," Bobby said, his voice echoing in the cold space. "This isn't what it looks like." You mean it isn't betrayal? Daniel's tone was sharp, his weapon steady. Evelyn interjected quickly, her voice clipped. You don't understand the forces at play. We didn't create this. We just adapted. Daniel's eyes flicked to Lily, who clutched her rabbit tightly, her gaze wide and pleading. He noted the rabbit was oddly bulkier than before. Then Caroline, sharp-eyed, caught it too. She gave Daniel the faintest nod. Max suddenly lunged forward, his bark exploding like thunder. The movement startled Bobby, who instinctively raised a hand, revealing papers clutched in his fist. Caroline seized the moment, rushing forward to grab Lily. In the chaos, the stuffed rabbit tumbled to the ground, and when it hit the floor, something metallic clinked inside. Daniel scooped it up and discovered a tiny recording device sewn into the seam. He pressed play. Static crackled, then voices filled the cavernous warehouse, the unmistakable tones of Bobby and Evelyn recorded in a late-night conversation. Thursday. He won't see it coming. Once he's gone, we move the funds, and no one questions us. Lily had hidden the truth in plain sight, turning her only comfort into their salvation. Smart kid, Caroline muttered, pulling Lily protectively behind her. Bobby's face drained of color as the words played back. Evelyn's composure shattered, her hands trembling as she whispered, "It wasn't supposed to go this far." Daniel advanced, his weapon unwavering. "You set me up to fall, and you dragged a child into it. That ends tonight," Bobby snarled, making one last move toward Daniel with the crumpled papers. But Max was faster. The German shepherd lunged, knocking him back with a growl that echoed through the frozen air. Daniel seized the moment to yank Lily free from their grasp. Caroline shoved Evelyn away, her own weapon drawn steady. Within seconds, the tide had shifted. They had the recording, they had the girl, and they had living proof of betrayal staring back at them in shock. As Daniel hustled Lily out into the snow, Max circling protectively, he knew the fight was far from finished. But for the first time in nights, he felt hope stirring beneath the weight of betrayal. The morning broke gray and brittle, the kind of winter light that seemed to seep straight through skin and bone. Charleston's historic streets lay blanketed in a thick crust of snow, the cobblestones buried under icy slush that crunched beneath every step. For Daniel Carter, the city felt more foreign than ever. Betrayal, suspicion, and the faint promise of justice all hung like frost in the air. He stood outside the police precinct, the digital recorder from Lily's rabbit clenched tight in his gloved hand. Max, the German shepherd, sat faithfully at his side, his amber eyes sharp, scanning every passerby with instinctive suspicion. Inside the precinct, tension buzzed like static. Daniel pushed through the heavy doors and was met by Sergeant Mark Davies, a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with thinning blonde hair and a gut that suggested years of cafeteria coffee and stress had taken their toll. Davies had once been Daniel's mentor, a gruff but dependable officer who believed loyalty to the badge outweighed all else. His pale blue eyes, however, flickered uneasily as they landed on the recorder in Daniel's hand. "Carter," Davies rumbled, voice low, "you sure you want to bring this here? Once it's in the system, there's no turning back." "I didn't come this far to stop now," Daniel replied, his jaw set. "Bobby and Evelyn betrayed more than me. They betrayed the department. They betrayed this city." Before Davies could respond, Captain Harold Simmons emerged from his office. A compact man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair cropped short. Simmons carried himself with the kind of authority that came from decades of managing chaos. His steel-gray eyes scanned Daniel, then flicked to Max. Simmons had always tolerated Daniel's unorthodox methods and his bond with the retired K-9, but today his gaze was harder. "Carter," Simmons said briskly, "you look like hell. I feel worse," Daniel admitted. He placed the recorder on the captain's desk. "This is proof. Bobby Lang and Evelyn Shaw planned to cut me out and move money tied to department contracts. Lily Harper heard them plotting. She risked her life to get this to me." Simmons's brows knit together. He pressed play. Evelyn's voice spilled into the room, cold and undeniable. "Once Thursday's done, he's out." "It's already lined up," Bobby's laugh followed. "He won't see it coming." The silence afterward was heavier than the storm outside. Simmons exhaled sharply, leaning back. "Damn, that's enough to burn them both." He looked at Davies. "Get internal affairs on this immediately. I want them brought in before the end of the day." But Davies hesitated. His gaze darted toward Daniel, then to Simmons. With respect, Captain, we don't know who else is involved. What if Langston and Shaw aren't acting alone? We move too soon. We spook whoever's above them. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Davies was right, but there was something odd in his tone, almost protective. He tucked the thought away, letting Simmons make the call. Then we move carefully, Simmons said. Carter, you're too close to this. Stay put until I give the order. Daniel clenched his fists. You're asking me to sit back while the same people who put a target on my back keep walking free, while Lily's safety is still at risk? Before the captain could respond, the door creaked open and a woman stepped inside, snow still clinging to her boots. It was Linda Green, a social worker in her early 50s who had been assigned to Lily's case. Linda had a gentle face framed by salt and pepper hair tied in a neat bun, but her eyes carried the fatigue of decades spent fighting for children no one else wanted to fight for. She wore a gray wool cardigan and a dark scarf, practical clothes that matched her practical nature. I heard, Linda said quietly. And if you think Lily's safe while this is unresolved, you're mistaken. That child has seen too much. She's strong, but she shouldn't carry this weight alone. Max padded over to Linda, sniffed her hand, then sat by her as though acknowledging her compassion. Daniel trusted the dog's instincts more than most people's. If Max approved, Linda was an ally. Caroline arrived moments later, her sharp eyes cutting through the room's tension. She was still in her heavy coat, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and her presence seemed to ignite Daniel's resolve. If we wait, they'll bury the evidence, she said flatly. Langston's already moving faster than we expected. Evelyn tried to push the meeting forward. They're desperate. Simmons rubbed his temples. Then what's your play, detective? Caroline placed her hands on the desk. We let Thursday's meeting happen. We control the stage. Daniel walks in with this recorder. We let them believe they're in control until they hang themselves with their own words. Daniel met her gaze and gave a faint nod. It was risky, but it felt right. Later that day, Daniel returned Lily to the inn where Mrs. Thatcher fussed over her like a grandmother hen. Mrs. Thatcher was in her 60s, sturdy and warm, her silver hair pulled into a braid that swung against her shoulder. She had been a widow for decades, her life shaped by loss, but she channeled it into kindness for travelers who needed more than just a bed. She pressed hot cocoa into Lily's hands and whispered promises of safety. Daniel crouched beside Lily. Tomorrow you won't be alone. Caroline and I will be there. Max, too. Lily's hazel eyes, wide with a child's mix of fear and hope, studied him. You promise? He managed a smile. On my badge. That night, Daniel barely slept. Images of the man in the raincoat haunted him. Who was he? An enforcer, a spy, or someone playing his own dangerous game? Each time he looked out the frosted window, he half expected to see the silhouette waiting. When dawn came, Max pressed against him, warmth and loyalty embodied. Daniel scratched behind the dog's ears. Whatever happens, boy, we finish this together. Thursday arrived with skies the color of steel and snowflakes drifting steadily like ash. The boardroom at City Hall had been reserved for the transition meeting. It was an elegant space with high ceilings, oak-paneled walls, and tall windows through which the storm's pale light poured. Around the long table sat board members in tailored suits, their polite chatter masking unease. Bobby Lang leaned back in his chair, his easy smile returning as though nothing could touch him. Evelyn Shaw stood by the window, papers in hand, her composure restored, though her fingers twitched slightly against the folder. Daniel entered with Caroline at his side and Max at his heel. The room stilled. Glad you could make it, Carter, Bobby said, his voice smooth. We were about to begin. Daniel slid into his chair, the recorder heavy in his pocket. The storm raged outside, snow pressing against the glass like an audience waiting for the final act. The trap was set. In the end, this story reminds us that even in the coldest winters of our lives, when betrayal and fear surround us, God can send us help in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes it is a loyal dog who never leaves our side, sometimes a brave child with a heart stronger than her years, and sometimes it is the courage within ourselves that we never thought we had. These are not accidents, they are miracles, quiet signs that the Lord still works among us. In our everyday lives, we may not face conspiracies or hidden enemies, but we all face struggles, doubts, and dark nights of the soul. And just like Daniel, Lily, Caroline and Max, we are never truly alone. God places people and moments in our path to remind us of His presence and His protection. So let this story be a gentle reminder. Trust, courage, and love can break even the strongest chains of fear. And above all, God is with us, guiding us through the storm. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what you learned from it. Write Amen in the comments if you believe God still works miracles in our world. And if you want more stories of faith, healing, and inspiration, remember to subscribe to our channel. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, protection, and joy. And